the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. If you dabble into sports betting like everybody here at Spot Track, you probably need an alternative, a brand you can trust that's going to give you the odds and the control to get the edge that you're looking for. Bettor Edge recognizes there's a problem with the big boys, too much money being lost, and the house-favored lines always make sure the big boys win. Bettor Edge is a social betting marketplace that gives users from over 45 states the chance to win with every single bet, because you can create everything, the price, the bet, and there's no vig or juice. It's safe, it's reliable, the payouts are lightning fast, and you can sign up right now using code SPOTTRAC, SPOTRAC, for $20 on the house. Visit bettoredge.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, April 7th. Huge sports weekend in terms of college. Not done yet. Tonight's the college final for those who dabble. Baseball's in full swing. It's a nightly experience. The football offseason has dwindled down to draft rumors and a couple of extensions, one of which we'll detail just a little bit here today. And for the most part, it's just all steam ahead with 6 or 7 major sports. It's Masters Week in golf. We'll be tracking that on the site like always. But Dan Soemann is here to talk some baseball because the story of the morning, at least taking away from this weekend, is Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s massive extension in Major League Baseball on the heels of a dozen or so really nice pre-arb extensions that have happened across the league. We touched on it a little bit last week. Dan is our resident expert here in tracking the youth movement in Major League Baseball and certainly all the pre-arb arbitration process. So he's going to join next, and we're going to dive into, I think, every angle possible with these major MLB contracts, and not just today, but where things may be headed over the next couple of months. All right, Dan, the Vlad Jr. extension was, certainly in the back of our minds here because it's the thing that hasn't gone away all winter, despite the fact that free agency is what now, 8 months away, 7 months away. You generally don't see contracts of this size happen when free agency is this close because, quite frankly, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 out of 100, you're leaving money on the table to take a deal right now that could be X value greater with 6 or 7 or 8 teams bidding for you and your services. I guess we'll start there. If it's 14 years, $500 million, the finalized numbers that appear to be coming out of Toronto right now for Vlad Jr., has he left money on the table, or do you think this is a maximum effort from him and his services?
No, I think, in terms of on the open market, could he have earned some additional money? Mm-hmm. Probably, but it seems like this was his number that he wanted all along. There's no deferrals, which seems important in this, considering the recent streak of long-term contracts that did include deferrals. So it sounds like, it's early on in the process here, but it does sound like this was a matter of they had a number and Toronto sort of just finally matched it, if you will. Like, I don't really think they exceeded his number, anything like that. It probably just comes down to when they looked at it at the end of the day, they really didn't want this looming over them all season. We're like 10 days into the season, and it's already been dominating conversation around that team. So I don't blame them if they just finally got to a point where they said, this guy wants to be here. And like you've highlighted, they haven't committed this kind of money to anyone in the past previously. Yeah. So for them to take this on was definitely major commitment on their end, but I kind of don't blame them for doing it and not letting him see the open market.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Blue Jays angle in a second here. Let's just kind of focus on the numbers quickly and get through these, what we know at least, right? The initial report, like I said, 14 years, $500 million flat. It's going to start in 2026. It's going to run through 2039. That's a $35.7 million APY. And without the deferrals, that's also the luxury tax salary on this contract for the next 14 years. Right now, that APY is 7th. And it's 4th in terms of position players, as long as you include Ohtani in that conversation. And we do. So it's up there. Everything about this is big, right? Big term, big APY, obviously a big guarantee at 500. We'll see if there's some MVP bonuses and things like that built in. But there is a full no trade clause, which I thought was really interesting because I agree with you. It sounds like this number was in the 330s as early as a year ago, right? And probably to start this offseason before, pre Juan Soto, which we'll talk about that angle as well here. But for this to become almost a $200 million increase, and then also for the player to garner a full no trade clause for 14 years, that's a huge win. How much of a sticking point do you think that was for Vlad Jr. and the agency? Or do you think that was just whipped cream on top of the sundae here?
I guess I don't. I mean, it had to be some sort of a priority for them to get it. So how much, I'm not sure, but maybe that was just a pot sweetener, right? But it gives him total control. So I don't see why it wouldn't have been a priority on their end.
I do think, especially with contracts that are running through age 40, and I thought we were kind of done with those. Aaron Judge's is approaching 38, 39. Even the Soto one kind of brushes up in the late 30s. I sort of thought we were done with the comically late extensions. You know what I mean? Vlad Jr.'s, he's going to age out of this. I don't know. What's the number? Is it 34, 35 in terms of real big production? It's probably a half contract in terms of what he can be, but we'll see. So obviously there's going to be a couple of years built into this thing that's going to be sort of fluffy, and we have seen teams try to get out of these things relatively quickly, right? We're at breaking points with some of our longer contracts that trades become part of this process. You extend out extra years, longer terms to lower the AAV, to lower the tax salary. And that's certainly something that's happened here, but there's going to become a point within the next 7 to 8 years of this contract that says, what's going to happen here? And now Vlad has the ability to say, it's going to be these 4 teams or nothing, or I'm never going to waive this thing. And it seems like something that should just be built into everybody's contract, but it's not, and with the NFL, it's become rarer and rarer. And somebody like Kirk Cousins, who's always had it, is literally holding Atlanta hostage to some degree in terms of what he can do in his situation. So not to say that things will get contentious, but this has become a more prevalent crutch and certainly a surplus for Vlad going forward over the next couple of years. What do you think about the term, Dan? Are you just numb to this now after Harper at 13 and Soto and certainly what Mookie Betts and Mike Trout have done in their careers in terms of these long-term contracts? Is it just something we continue to have to live with and get used to? Or do you think it's truly something that over the course of the next 2 or 3 years with the new CBA coming around the corner, it should eventually be phased out of this sport?
I think we've seen it recently get phased out for the 30-year-old guys. Like the Trey Turner, the Trey Turner deals, I think are sort of a thing of the past, or mostly a thing of the past. I think we're going to still continue to see it with these younger free agent, like these premier free agents, that this number gets so high that you're just looking to spread that value out over multiple years, even if the number is in the $30+ million, right? I mean, there's like a consensus that per WAR on the open market is worth somewhere between 8 to 12 million. If Vlad or Juan Soto is a 6+ WAR player, you're looking at 60 million in a 1 year AAV type salary. I know I'm like really painting broad strokes here, but so if we're talking that kind of money, that's when these teams are trying to spread that kind of value out over multiple years. So yes, if you're asking me, is this going to look good from ages 35 plus? Probably not, but they're really not paying for that. They're paying for the short-term production in his prime, which a lot of things suggest he is peaking, still on the upward trajectory of what his potential could be. I mean, players in general at this age are still on that path. So to think that he can continue this at for a number of years still is not out of the realm. Now the question is his defense. Does he become a DH? We already saw this play out with Rafael Devers. Maybe I'm getting ahead of the conversation that you wanted to have here, but that's an aspect of this is, like, do you want to commit this kind of money to a guy that is probably going to eventually be a DH? We had this same conversation with Devers, and now here it is 2-3 years later, and it's already come to light. So I'm not sure where, like, I would listen to is this player worth $500 million over the course of his contract? I don't know, but that's the cost of players of this stature in the current game, right?
Yeah, you said something really important here, which is in a truncated world, which is obviously the world that I would love all these sports to live in, right? I'd love to see 5 to 6 year contracts instead of 13 and 14 year contracts, but it's not the way the business is done in the sport, and it's for obvious reasons, right? But in a truncated world, he's probably a $49 million per year player, right? I don't think he's quite up there in the upper echelons, right? If Juan Soto is a 51 for 10 years plus, Vlad's in that second tier. Vlad's behind that tier of the Otanis and the Sotos and even the Judges of the world, but he's an A- in terms of what this would be. So if its starting point's 49 to 50 million a year, and the Blue Jays are now only paying 35.7 for, or even over the next 8 years, let's just assume that's the likely powerful production point of this contract. That's a $250 million payout, a $280 million payout. So is there $220 million of fluff built into this? Probably. But it's back pay for previous services are already rendered. And that's how baseball's always operated. They don't really care, right? It's how many years does it take to get to a player to 40 years old? That's basically how much term we have to use and spread out this APY and this tax salary. We're just going to continue to do that until the structure of the sport changes, which leads me to my next bullet point, because I know, even though it's completely backwards thinking based on everything we've just laid out, I know the salary cap conversations are now going to be full-fledged for the next week, right? Why are teams able to do this? Why isn't there a more rigid structure in place? But it's completely wrong thinking, right? The baseball's spreading itself out to eliminate a soft tax threshold or get under a second tax threshold in Toronto's case. If there was a hard cap, what would happen to contracts like this? Truly, what would it look like? Because it wouldn't be 5 for 300. He wouldn't be the 60 million APY that you're talking about. Everybody in this sport would make less money. And that would include the middle class. And it would include guys coming into the league with a $760 million, $1,000 minimum salary, staying on that salary for 6 years. They would get 3% increases. They would be team controlled. Arbitration would be the ugliest war, because teams are going to be looking to shave every single dollar, not just millions, tens of dollars, because there's a hard cap. To me, it would completely ruin the structure of the sport, even though I don't necessarily agree with the current structure of the sport, right? But the salary cap is the complete wrong moniker to bring into this conversation, right?
As far as I understand it, yes. Now, could I be wrong? Yes, but we're pretty close to this, and I think the public consensus is, or like the public narrative, talking point, whatever, however you want to label it, is this like salary cap. But we're close enough to see that all that would do is restrict spending throughout the league, where it seems simplistic, like, well, we got to stop these $500 million contracts from happening so the rest of the money trickles throughout the league. It's just not going to work like that if you do cap the ceiling like that. So, and the interesting part is that you always hear that the Players Association wants nothing to do with that. They don't want to eliminate these contracts. They want their upper echelon players to get as much money as they can. And we've already seen, we saw that threshold, surpassed with Ohtani, then Soto, and now we're there with Vlad Jr. It's going to keep. I mean, we'll probably talk about future free agents here at a bit, but like that's going to be the threshold. Like that number is not just going to go away. Now, is every player that comes along going to surpass that? No, but in terms of young premier talent hitting free agency at a prime age, that's going to be a number we just keep topping over and over again now.
Two quick points on this note, because you're right. We are going to get to some what's next, who's next conversations. But to me, the salary cap becomes a real conversation if and when B- players start making way more money than they ever should in this league. That happened in the NBA for a good chunk of years, to the point of where it wasn't even about empowering the middle class. It was about just balancing everything out, balancing the logic out a little bit. Right now, they're maybe as wonky as any sport right now we have, because, we're going to have minimum salaries at 1.2 and max is at 75 here soon in that league. But they did go through a period where too many average players were making really good money, like eye-popping, headline-worthy money. That's not baseball. And if anything, my other point is, you're right. The stars are being overcompensated, which is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the face of Canadian baseball, right? Signing a contract in Canada that is the second or third largest in the history of this sport. That's just a good thing. That's marketable. That's tangible. And it's good for that franchise as a whole that has an owner, by the way, that rivals the financial backing of what Steve Cohen is doing in New York with the Mets, right? Rogers Communications couldn't be a heftier backing for major contracts in Major League Baseball right now. So the top 5% are overachieving financially. But what's also happening, and we talked about it a little last week, and you and I have been dialed into this now for a bunch of off seasons, is these younger players that are coming into the league are getting the opportunity to say yes or no to $100 million pre-arbitration extensions. That would never happen in a salary cap league. Never. 0%, 0 out of 0. You would be team controlled. You would be locked into minimums, and you would have to earn your right to get to free agency, at which point owners would still have the ability to say, no, thank you, or you're worth less than you think you are, which is what they're doing right now anyway. So all the owner suppression would still happen, but now they'd have this hard salary cap number to use in their back pocket, like the Patriots and the Saints and so many other teams in all these hard cap leagues have been able to do. It becomes maximum leverage for teams and owners, which is the last thing players need right now. So for us to sit here and gawk at what the Dodgers have done, or what 15 contracts in baseball look like, right? Which is all it is. It's like 15 to 20 really big contracts, and say the sport is broken. BS. Guys are actually getting what they're worth. And now we're starting to see 20-year-olds start to overachieve a little bit financially. To me, it's healthy. We're in a pretty nice spot right now. We have, 40% of the league in terms of owners really shelling out some serious bucks. And by the way, the owners that aren't, and I don't know if you read this out of Pittsburgh this morning, the owners that aren't are really starting to hear it and really starting to feel it from not just fans and average Joes, but local businesses and local, CEOs who are saying, hey, we want to be involved in the Paul Skeens business, but you're not doing us any justice, because if it's just Paul Skeens on a baseball card or on a billboard in Pittsburgh and your team still sucks, we're not going to spend our money on that. You know what I mean? So I really do think that there's some legitimate pressure and things happening in the right direction, to the point of where when these contracts happen, we got to celebrate the sport, not try to fix it or change it or bash it. It's completely backwards thinking, because all you're adding to it with a hard cap is, I don't know,
an excuse.
250% less of this conversation. You're going to have terrible contracts. You're going to have pissed off superstars, and you're going to have an ugly players association battle. So I already think we're headed towards a strike. We got to keep those words out of the conversation, because all they're going to do is make things much more contentious. I haven't had you on to have your thoughts on the week that was with the Christian Campbells and the Cal Raleighs and all these contract extensions we saw. I think it's up to 14 or 15 now this offseason with the young players. I've sort of buried the lead on my opinion on it, but where do you stand on this? Is is it scary waters? Because Thursday's show with Brandon, I sort of, dropped a nugget that you and I both know, which is they don't really work out that great for the team or even the player. Ronald Acuna Jr. sort of notwithstanding here. It's not a great value for teams to do it, but I don't want teams to stop doing it either. So where do you live with these young players kind of cashing in early?
Well, it's right to say historically they haven't, but also the clock hasn't really expired enough on some of these more recent ones, which have been kind of exclusively with like premier talent. Whereas, I mean, you could argue, Luis Robert Jr. was a premier prospect at the time he signed his deal, et cetera. But what I mean is, like, I think that the Corbin Carroll, the Jackson Cherios, those types of deals, Bobby Witt Jr., et cetera, those deals are going to look real good 5 years from now. And looking at it in hindsight, at that point, we might be saying, boy, that was a really nice flurry of young pre-arb deals. So I think both things are true, right? It's great to see these young guys locking in long-term money guarantees. Are they, in theory, leaving money on the table? Some of them, yes, almost definitely. But for instance, like a guy like Christian Campbell was not some massively touted prospect. He just flew through the Red Sox system, has looked great. His stock went all the way up over the last 12 months. So to like try and Monday morning quarterback a guy like that, taking, guaranteed money, I'm certainly all for that, even if long-term, the Red Sox come out on top. But it's been a crazy week in terms of extensions. I don't even necessarily think we're done. We still hear the Red Sox are talking about it with other prospects, Roman Anthony and Marcelo Meyer potentially. So I think it's a trend that is really going to continue here. And it's going to sort of exacerbate the other conversation we just had in terms of these premier free agents. It's going to be so rare that they hit the open market that once they do hit if and when they do hit the open market, they're going to get paid eye-popping numbers. It's just that's what it's going to cost in free agency to get access to guys like Vlad Jr., who are 6-7 WAR type of offensive producers at age 27, 28, like that, right? So, those are gonna go hand in hand, where teams across the league are trying to lock these premier guys up earlier and earlier to avoid having to pay that price down the road, right?
The Blue Jays, they've kind of been the butt of jokes across the league, and certainly here with us a couple times as being sort of the bridesmaids, right? They've tried like hell to reel in one of these big free agent fish, whether it's Ohtani or Judge or Corbin Burns, or pretty much everybody's top couple of free agents over the past 4 to 5 off seasons. They've been in on. They've been tracked as making significant offers, and they just haven't been able to get it done. Now, they've used the trade well, in my opinion, over the past couple of in seasons or off seasons to establish themselves at least a little bit, especially with the starting rotation. Is this a win for them? Like, how do you assess the Vlad Jr. 14-year contract, even just short term? Because you and I have come on here, and I think we did it before the start of the season, and Vlad or no Vlad, I'm not sure, and I just saw them play the Mets for 3 days. I'm not sure this is a team that's close to being an AL contender or a World Series contender for sure. What does this now do, right, for this organization that could be setting themselves up for a Mike Trout type situation over the next couple of seasons if they don't play their cards exactly correctly, and quite frankly, stack another couple $100 million onto this $500 million to try to reinvigorate what was once one of the better prospect pools in all of baseball?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know how they tackle that going forward, but it's good on them for at least locking up the starting foundational piece to doing that. Whatever that plan might be, whether that's new front office, et cetera, you have to start somewhere. This is a great
start. Can I jump in on that real quick?
Oh, yeah,
because that's a big part of it, right? Is the reputation. Is Vlad Jr. the type of player that will attract other talent now? Is having him under contract for even, let's just say, 8 good years, is that the kind of thing that a free agent who's out there says, all right, I want to be attached to that team because that player is going to be there for the long term? Or, did that ship sail when Ohtani said no and Judge said no and the list goes on and on? But is Vlad in that realm for you, Dan?
I think certainly. Now, tongue in cheek, that doesn't mean they're going to start attracting a bunch of people. Yeah. I think there are definite cross-border tax-related concerns here in terms of like the Blue Jays would probably, in theory, have to overpay a lot of guys to get them to come there. Like they're not some destination spot, even though Toronto is a great city, correct? So I think there's still hurdles there to the point where like your earlier point, they have to at some point develop talent around him and not just rely on trying to sign guys. But to that point, I know they haven't had many massive contracts, but they have tried to spend when situations have presented themselves, mainly with their pitching staff, which has all been paid essentially, right? So I'm willing to leave the light on that this helps in a large way attract other talent. Now, I don't think they're just like the Mets, the Dodgers, like teams are actively seeking them out. But if they're willing to make competitive offers, I don't see why this would not be an anchor in their lineup to work around, right? Okay,
fair enough. Going forward, some of these free agents that could become available for Toronto next offseason, right? I mean, the story of this offseason in terms of big trades was certainly Kyle Tucker to the Cubs. That's going to be the on the clock move now. Can Chicago lock down Tucker before free agency? You and I both think that's a 0 out of 0 chance, right? I mean, it seems like he and his camp are destined to wait for free agency. They want that bidding war. They want things to go up, but his price has gone up today. There's no question about that in your mind, right?
Oh yeah, he's the big winner here. We've seen, we've seen the premier guy on the market get money almost no matter what. You can consider that this Vlad is got the premier money for this free agency round if you want. I think Kyle Tucker is going to be, the sparkle in everyone's eyes here as we head towards free agency coming up. Not that he wouldn't have been before, but we're just saying we don't see many multiple massive contracts in one free agency period all that often outside of a couple instances, right? So if now you've checked Vlad Jr. off the board,
yep,
he's the next guy. And even looking ahead, it's like we've been saying, a lot of these premier free agent or would-be free agents in the upcoming off seasons have already been locked up long term. It's going to get real ugly real quick in the future years, where we might not see this 500 number surpassed after Kyle Tucker for a little bit. We very well could, but we might not. And I'm not even sure when the next one could be. So it's going to be interesting to see where that number gets to if he's like kind of the last of the Mohicans.
Yeah, that's fair. On that note, and to bring it all together, kind of, we talked about the Blue Jays and how badly they needed a centerpiece going forward. And certainly Vlad represents that. Whether it'll work or not remains to be seen. That's part of the overpay. Okay. But I'm going to put a little math at you. How much of Vlad's $500 million is the Blue Jays saying we just can't let him walk out the door at any point in time over the next 8 months, percentage wise? And how much of $500 million, if it was $330 6 months ago, is Juan Soto? Right? Both those things are major factors here in the $500 million price point. But if you had to weigh it on a percentage scale, why is that number what it is today?
Yeah, the Ohtani, then subsequently the Soto numbers kind of broke everyone's brains, if you will, in terms of those were the thresholds. It wasn't long ago that we thought the Aaron Judge number was like wildly high, right? I mean, right. Not unwarranted, just like, wow, we can't believe that number is there, right? In free agency, we've hit that point. We're like well surpassed that. We've well surpassed that threshold to the point where, like the next part, the next development in all of this, I think, is these deals getting signed with a player opt out early on that allows these guys, like what would Judge get on the open market now?
Well,
if
I was going to bring up another big winner, which is Pete Alonso. There's no question Pete Alonso just made money today. And I realize he's almost 30, but he's got an opt out with the Mets, an ownership that wants Pete Alonso for however many years it's going to be. Maybe it's 4 more years, but this didn't just help overall free agents. This helped the first base market, at least logically speaking, rise to the top a little bit more. Don't you agree with that? It has to. There's no other way to look at it, Dan.
For sure. No one's saying he's now a $500 million guy.
No.
It's just like he could theoretically, like, kicking the can a year. Whereas a few weeks ago, we said it could be real bad if he runs into overlapping free agency with Vlad Jr. Now it's worked out really well because he's off the board. People will then turn to him.
Toronto's off the board for him. That was a big team. That was a big team for Pete Alonso. So yeah, there's going to be some indirect repercussions here, no question about it. I can give you this because I know we're talking numbers here. I just ran Kyle Tucker now this morning in our analysis and our valuation system. He was a low 30s per year player heading into here. He did have a bit of a downtick last year in Houston. I think the writing was on the wall in terms of that divorce, but he's built for a big year in Chicago. If he just continues to be who he's been, and now with Soto on the books and Vlad on the books and bringing a couple of the other, big time contracts into this conversation, Tucker will be 28. So I'm going to put him out to the 40 age mark because that's just where the overpays continue to go. So this is a 12-year extension, 12-year contract for Kyle Tucker. And I've got it at $44 million a year. Okay. So he is the next $500 million player in baseball. We've got him at 12 for 533 in our system right now. That's a big time swing. And it's probably right around where things end up. Is it more closer to 42, maybe 40 flush? Probably. But he's a better overall player than Vlad Jr., despite being 2 years older. He's got a longer, bigger resume, and he's going to have now on the open market something Vlad didn't have. He's going to have every big fish, every big team making an offer at him. So I don't think it's absurd that he not just gets to 500, but he kind of blows past it over the next 8 to 9 months.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's going to be the next exciting guy to watch. And then we'll probably get a little bit of a break here, but I'm excited to see where that lands. Yep.
I'll give you some homework before I get you out of here. Cause you did bring something up that's interesting. Who is that next big one? Who is that next gigantic near veteran extension or free agent contract payday? Because I think for the most part, teams are going to try to err on the side of let's try to get him young, in the hundreds to maybe $200 million mark, right? And try to buy out a couple years of free agency, either with guarantees or with club options. But who's going to be the guy that takes it all the way to free agency, like Tucker appears to be, and then scores this next gigantic, massive top of the market contract? It might be quite a bit away here. Is that how you're seeing it too?
I mean, I'm taking a little bit of I'm browsing the free agent tracker, looking ahead here on Spottrack.com, and it's not pretty. I mean, I'll have to really truly look.
Yeah.
The next appealing name is maybe Jazz Chisholm in 2027, but that's not even truly what we're talking about. He's already on an arbitration extension. So I'm going to have to look for truly the next superstar type of player that could hit free agency.
I mean, most of the superstars are either locked up or 4 or 5 years away. Like I'm thinking like Ellie De La Cruz, no pitcher is getting $400 million. Do you agree with that? I mean, no pitcher is going to touch this threshold anymore, at least in the current status of the game. So it's going to have to be somebody like a 5-tool player that for the course of 4+ years of control is lighting the league on fire. And most of those guys are already locked up. It's a bit of a gap right now happening in baseball. And that benefits, like I said, some of the Alex Bregmans, the Pete Alonsos, the guys who've maybe gone through the ringer a little bit here and just need some sort of multi-year guarantee for the next couple of seasons. So those are the names we'll be focusing on for sure. But yeah, I'll give you some homework and maybe try to project out 2 or 3 names that could be in this conversation and when that might happen.
Sounds good.
All right. I'm putting one more thing on your plate, and I didn't give you any heads up, so I don't apologize for that. The big contracts in baseball right now. So Soto, Ohtani, this Vlad Jr. deal, Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, Aaron Judge, Manny Machado, Francisco Lindor, Tatis Jr., and Bryce Harper. That's the top 10 in terms of total value, not adjusted for deferred compensation at all. Of those names I just rattled off, who carries the scariest contract in baseball right now?
Probably Manny Machado.
Yeah.
That's the one. I could see that one looking bad probably quicker than some of the others, but
you have more confidence in Tatis Jr. than Machado because they pretty much end the same year, 33, 34. But it's close,
probably
right?
age bias. Yeah, it's probably age bias, but
okay.
I guess I don't. Well, I mean, obviously, the Mike Trout contract does not look good, but I mean, I think we've talked at length about that in terms of these more recent contracts. That's the one I would pick. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. By the way, Bryce Harper probably going to have to get out of this contract at some point soon, and I think Philadelphia is just going to have to oblige. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think both sides have already discussed that, if I'm not mistaken. That he needs, and that's where I get, that's where I stand in saying, like, if these contracts are going to so quickly look so terrible, they can sign them for the flashy total AAV number to report, but they need like Aaron Judge needed a path back to free agency if he really wanted to keep a competitive salary value. But
what do you think the win share rate on that Judge contract already is? I mean, the Yankees have already gained a year and a half worth of value out of this thing.
It'll be interesting to assess here, because he stayed healthy. I like the main concern was health plus how does that profile age. And all he's done is sort of look better than he did even previously. Like this is like Barry Bonds territory, right? Where you just don't pitch to him. So
it's wild.
Yeah.
All right. Always good to have a big contract to talk about in this league, and we'll probably have to do a little bit more work on these young contracts soon because, like you said, probably 2 or 3 more coming down the docket before we get to maybe even Easter here. So. It's been a pretty fun little burst over the past couple of weeks after, Juan Soto notwithstanding kind of a down off season. And we'll see what this does because while the money doesn't trickle down in baseball, it does trickle up. You know what I mean? So there will be ramifications, maybe 4 or 5 players wide from this morning's news and from whatever else comes next down the docket. So good stuff by you and keep it up.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, real quick before I get out of here, I want to touch on just a few of the NFL extensions we saw last week. Unfortunately, the full breakdown's not yet available to us in the system, but Trey McBride, the tight end for the Arizona Cardinals, who has been just rock solid, despite the fact that it took him 18 weeks to catch a touchdown pass last year. He is that face of that position right now in terms of the youth, and now, of course, the money. It's a massive extension. It's a historic extension for Trey McBride. And we should have the full guarantee structure on this thing sooner rather than later. But let's just assume this thing is locked in for 3 years. It's $76 million over the course of the next 4 seasons new. So 5-year total. That's $19 million per year in terms of new money. Tops everything that Travis Kelce and George Kittle and the likes have done. Sounds like $43 million of it is practically guaranteed. That sounds like something we'll see over the next 2.5 seasons. So a 3-year full guarantee makes sense here. And it's the right move by Arizona, who are swinging up quickly. And if they have a nice draft in the next couple of weeks here, could really become a factor in what has become a up for grabs division, sort of say. And speaking of which, Las Vegas held their word and extended Geno Smith to what's initially sounding like a base value of 2 years, $75 million. So it's a 3-year total contract. That's $37.5 per year. If that sounds familiar, that's what Geno got offered in Seattle. However, it does sound like $66.5 million of this thing is going to be fully guaranteed. We'll see if that's the signing guarantee. But if that's the case, there's no question that kicks the Seattle number out of coverage. And that's certainly worthy of Geno Smith signing this contract, especially at his age and what he's gone through over the course of his career. So the Raiders have something locked in for at least the next 2 seasons, 2 at 66.5, it sounds like. Full structure coming soon. Does that preclude them from taking a quarterback in this draft? I'd say it probably takes them out of the first round conversation, but if the right situation falls into their lap, this contract should not stop them from doing anything later in the draft. It's certainly going to be Geno's team in 2025. They'll be guaranteed in 2026, but maybe they're in a Kirk Cousins type situation at that point in time. I wouldn't stop them from doing anything at this position because they do have some defensive core. They do have a decent offensive line that they continue to build around. And I imagine there's going to be a weapon or two allocated in this draft that could really change the course of their offense, and they'll need it because Geno Smith needs weapons. He's not a create offense type quarterback. He's a system quarterback that needs the right pieces to the puzzle. So good deal for him, at least surfacey. Sounds like a 2 for 66 guarantee. And for Trey McBride, a historic deal with historic guarantees, a historic APY. And again, we'll see what the actual tea leaves say when they come to us. But for now, 2 really nice extensions in the NFL and plenty more to come because it's that type of year for both baseball and for football. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Trade Podcast.